rain had not stopped for 3 days when Elena first arrived at the Blackwood mansion. The enormous gates opened slowly in front of her, revealing a house so large and silent it almost looked abandoned. She tightened her grip on the small suitcase in her hand and looked down at the paper with the address one more time. This was the place, the job she desperately needed, the opportunity everyone in town talked about in whispers. People said Victor Blackwood was one of the richest businessmen in the city. Cold, powerful, untouchable. Some even claimed that no maid ever stayed in his mansion for more than a few weeks. But Elena had no choice. After her father's illness left the family drowning in debt, this was the only job she could find that paid enough to help save her home. The moment she stepped inside, she felt the tension in the air. The mansion was beautiful, but it did not feel warm. The marble floors reflected the dim chandelier lights, and every servant walked quietly as if they were afraid of making a mistake. No one smiled. No one spoke more than necessary. Then she met Victor Blackwood, tall, serious, and always dressed perfectly. He barely looked at her during the interview. His voice was calm, but distant. "You will follow every instruction exactly," he said without emotion. "If you cannot handle pressure, leave now." Elena nodded softly. "I can handle it." Victor finally looked at her then, almost as if he were trying to understand something hidden behind her eyes. But before she could say another word, he simply walked away. From her very first day, nothing was easy. The other workers warned her quietly to stay out of Victor's path. They told her he trusted no one. Sometimes he would suddenly blame servants for things they did not do. Other times, he would ignore them completely for days. Elena tried her best to remain respectful and patient, even when the work became exhausting. But soon, she realized something else. Victor treated her differently. He gave her the hardest tasks in the mansion. If a glass broke, he assumed it was her fault. If dinner was late, he blamed her. One evening, after guests left the mansion, he publicly criticized her in front of everyone over a tiny mistake that wasn't even hers. The other servants expected Elena to quit, but she didn't. Instead, every morning, she continued working quietly with kindness in her eyes. She helped the older cook when her hands shook too much to carry trays. She stayed late to clean rooms no one asked her to clean. And when Victor's young nephew Daniel accidentally locked himself in a storage room and began crying in fear, Elena was the only one who calmed him down. For the first time, Victor looked surprised, but the real mystery began a few nights later. Elena was carrying laundry through the west hallway when she heard something strange behind a locked door. A weak voice. Someone crying. She froze. The servants had warned her never to go near that side of the mansion. Then suddenly, the door behind her slammed shut, and Victor Blackwood's cold voice echoed through the dark hallway. "What exactly are you doing here?" Elena's heart began pounding the moment she turned around and saw Victor standing at the end of the hallway. The dim light above him flickered slightly, making his expression even harder to read. He looked calm, but there was something dangerous hidden behind his eyes. I was bringing the laundry upstairs," Elena answered quietly, trying not to sound nervous. Victor glanced at the basket in her hands, then toward the locked door beside her. For a second, neither of them spoke. "You were told to stay away from this part of the mansion," he said coldly. "I'm sorry. I got lost." Victor stepped closer, his shoes echoing against the marble floor. In this house, curiosity causes problems. Elena lowered her eyes. "It won't happen again." For a moment, it looked like he wanted to say something else. But instead, he reached into his pocket, unlocked the mysterious door slightly, and slipped inside before quickly shutting it behind him. The crying stopped immediately. Elena stood frozen in the hallway long after he disappeared. That night, she could barely sleep in her tiny servant room on the 3rd floor. Rain tapped softly against a window, while her thoughts kept returning to the locked room. Who was inside? Why did Victor look so angry whenever anyone came near that hallway? But the next morning, everything inside the mansion continued as normal, as if nothing had happened. Victor sat silently at the breakfast table reading business reports while the servants moved carefully around him. Elena noticed dark circles under his eyes for the first time. He looked exhausted, though he tried to hide it. Then suddenly, one of the newer servants accidentally dropped a silver tray onto the floor. The loud crash filled the dining room. Everyone froze. The young servant immediately apologized, shaking with fear, but Victor's face darkened instantly. "Get out," he snapped. The poor boy looked terrified. "Sir, please." I said leave. No one dared to speak after that. Elena quietly bent down and helped clean the broken dishes, while the others avoided eye contact. As she gathered the shattered pieces, she noticed Victor staring at her again, not with anger this time. Something else. Something conflicted. Later that afternoon, the mansion's elderly housekeeper, Mrs. Harper, finally spoke to Elena privately while folding towels in the laundry room. "You should keep your distance from Mr. Blackwood," the older woman whispered carefully. "He wasn't always like this." Elena looked up. "What happened to him?" Mrs. Harper hesitated. "Years ago, his younger sister disappeared. After that, everything changed. He stopped trusting people. Even his own family rarely visits now." Elena stayed quiet, listening carefully. "Some say he blames himself," Mrs. Harper continued softly. "Others believe he's hiding secrets inside this mansion." Before Elena could ask more, footsteps approached the hallway. Mrs. Harper immediately stopped talking. That evening, Elena brought tea to Victor's office for the first time. She knocked gently before entering. Victor sat alone near the fireplace, staring at an old photograph in his hands. He quickly placed it face down when he noticed her. "Your tea, sir," Elena said softly. As she turned to leave, Victor suddenly spoke. "Why do you continue working here?" Elena stopped. "Most people quit after a few days," he said without looking at her, "especially after being treated badly." She hesitated before answering honestly. "Because people who are hurting sometimes push others away without meaning to." Victor slowly looked up at her. For the first time since arriving at the mansion, Elena saw pain behind his cold expression. But before another word could be spoken, a loud noise echoed upstairs. A crash. Then came the same weak crying Elena had heard behind the locked door. Victor's face instantly turned pale, and without another word, he rushed out of the office toward the dark hallway upstairs. Elena stood frozen in the office for several seconds after Victor disappeared upstairs. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed through the mansion, followed by complete silence. Even the servants in the hallway stopped moving, exchanging nervous glances without saying a word. Something was very wrong in this house. Slowly, Elena placed the untouched tea tray onto the desk and stepped into the hallway. She could hear faint voices upstairs now, though she couldn't make out the words. Part of her wanted to return to her room and forget everything she had seen, but another part of her could not ignore the fear she heard in that cry. As she reached the staircase, Mrs. Harper suddenly grabbed her arm. "Don't go up there," the older woman whispered urgently. Elena looked confused, but someone could be hurt. Mrs. Harper's face tightened with worry. "You don't understand this family. Some doors inside this mansion should remain closed." Before Elena could respond, Victor's voice thundered from upstairs. "Everyone back to work." The entire house immediately obeyed. The next few days became even stranger. Victor grew colder toward everyone, especially Elena. He avoided speaking to her unless necessary, and when he did, his tone was sharp and distant again. Yet somehow, Elena noticed something unusual beneath his anger. It was almost as if he wanted to trust her, but was fighting against it. One rainy afternoon, Elena entered the library to dust the shelves and found Daniel sitting quietly near the fireplace. The little boy looked upset. "Are you all right?" she asked gently. Daniel hesitated before nodding toward the upstairs hallway. "Uncle Victor gets scared when the crying starts." Elena sat beside him carefully. "Do you know who it is?" The child lowered his voice. "They say Aunt Isabella never really left this house." A chill ran through Elena instantly. Before she could ask another question, the library door opened sharply. Victor stepped inside, his expression hardening the moment he saw them together. "Daniel," he said firmly, "go to your room." The boy quickly obeyed. Victor waited until the door closed before turning toward Elena. "You should not fill his head with stories." "I wasn't," Elena replied softly. "He seemed lonely." Victor rubbed his forehead tiredly. Loneliness is not your responsibility here. For a moment, Elena almost answered back, but she stopped herself. There was exhaustion in Victor's voice now, deeper than before. He looked like a man carrying something too heavy to hide anymore. That same evening, Elena discovered another unsettling detail. While cleaning one of the guest rooms, she accidentally knocked over a small wooden box hidden behind old books. Several photographs spilled across the floor. She bent down to gather them, then froze. One picture showed a smiling young woman standing beside Victor near the mansion garden. She looked warm and kind, completely different from the cold atmosphere of the house. Written on the back in faded ink were the words, "Victor and Isabella, the summer before everything changed." Elena stared at the photograph carefully. The woman looked familiar somehow. Then she noticed something else. Around Isabella's neck hung a silver necklace with a small blue stone. The exact same necklace Elena had seen hanging beside the locker room upstairs. Her heart began racing. Suddenly, footsteps approached outside the door. Elena quickly gathered the photographs just as the handle turned. Victor entered the room, stopping immediately when he saw the box in her hands. His face lost all color. For the first time since she arrived at the mansion, he looked genuinely shaken. "Where did you find that?" he asked quietly. Elena carefully handed him the photographs. They fell from the shelf by accident. Victor stared at the image of Isabella for several long seconds. His expression softened with sadness before the cold mask slowly returned. "You were not supposed to see these." Elena hesitated. "What happened to her?" Victor's jaw tightened instantly. "That is none of your concern." He took the box from her hands and walked toward the door. But before leaving, he suddenly stopped. Without turning around, he spoke in a low voice. "If you care about your job, stay away from the west hallway after midnight." Then he walked out, leaving Elena alone with one terrifying question growing louder in her mind. What was Victor Blackwood hiding upstairs? The warning Victor gave Elena should have frightened her enough to stay away from the west hallway forever. But instead, it only made the mystery heavier in her mind. Over the next several days, the atmosphere inside Blackwood Mansion became unbearable. The servants whispered more quietly than before. Doors stayed locked. Lights remained on late into the night. And every evening, sometime after midnight, Elena heard the same faint crying echo through the upper floor. Sometimes it sounded weak and distant. Other times, it sounded painfully close. Victor barely slept anymore. Elena noticed him wandering the mansion at strange hours, checking locks, staring through windows, or disappearing into the west hallway alone. His temper also grew worse. One morning, he fired a gardener simply for entering the wrong room. Another servant left the mansion in tears after Victor accused her of spying. Yet despite everything, Elena could not hate him. Whenever she caught him alone, she saw flashes of someone completely different beneath the coldness. A man exhausted by guilt. A man terrified of losing control. Late one evening, Elena found Daniel sitting alone near the grand staircase again, clutching a blanket tightly. "Did you have another nightmare?" she asked gently. The little boy nodded. "About the crying?" Elena whispered. Daniel looked toward the dark hallway upstairs before speaking carefully. "Uncle Victor thinks he can protect everyone by hiding the truth," he said quietly. "But Aunt Isabella used to say secrets only make people lonely." Elena's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" But before Daniel could answer, thunder shook the mansion windows. At the exact same moment, every light on the upper floor suddenly went dark. The entire house fell silent. Then came the sound again, a loud bang upstairs, followed by terrified crying. The servants froze in fear. Mrs. Harper dropped the tray she was carrying. Somewhere down the hall, someone whispered a prayer under their breath. Victor appeared almost instantly from his office. "No one goes upstairs," he ordered sharply. But this time, Elena noticed something different. He looked afraid. Not angry, afraid. Victor grabbed a flashlight and rushed toward the staircase alone. The moment he disappeared into the darkness, Elena made a decision she could no longer avoid. She followed him. The upstairs hallway felt colder than the rest of the mansion. Rain hammered against the tall windows while shadows stretched across the walls. Elena moved carefully, hearing Victor's footsteps somewhere ahead. Then she saw it. The locked door at the end of the west hallway was slightly open for the first time. A weak light flickered inside. Elena's breathing became uneven as she stepped closer. The crying had stopped now, replaced by complete silence. She reached the doorway slowly and looked inside. The room was not empty. There were old medical supplies scattered across a table. Family photographs covered the walls. Newspapers lay stacked everywhere, many with headlines about Isabella Blackwood's disappearance from years ago. And in the center of the room sat a woman in a wheelchair facing the window. Elena froze. The woman's dark hair rested over her shoulders, and around her neck hung the bluestone necklace from the photograph. Isabella, alive. Before Elena could even process what she was seeing, Victor suddenly stepped out from the shadows behind her. "You should have listened to me," he said quietly. Elena turned toward him in shock. "She's alive all this time?" Victor's face looked pale and broken under the dim light. "It's not that simple." The woman in the wheelchair slowly began turning toward them. But before Elena could fully see her face, Isabella suddenly let out a terrified scream. At the same instant, every light in the hallway went out completely. Darkness swallowed the mansion. Then Elena heard something else. Footsteps, not Victor's. Someone else was inside the house. The darkness inside Blackwood Mansion felt alive. Elena's breath caught in her throat as the sound of slow footsteps moved through the west hallway. Somewhere nearby, Isabella continued crying softly while Victor stepped protectively in front of her wheelchair. "Stay behind me," he said in a low voice. For the first time since Elena arrived at the mansion, his cold voice carried real fear. Another loud thunderclap shook the windows. Then the emergency lights flickered weakly to life, covering the hallway in a dim red glow. The footsteps stopped. Victor immediately grabbed the flashlight from the floor and aimed it toward the open doorway. But the hallway outside was empty, or at least it looked empty. Elena noticed the front curtains near the staircase moving slightly, as if someone had just disappeared around the corner. "Who else is in this house?" she whispered. Victor didn't answer right away. His jaw tightened, as though he had been expecting this moment for a long time. Then Isabella suddenly reached for Elena's wrist with trembling hands. "You have to leave," she whispered weakly, "before he finds you too." Elena stared at her in confusion. "Who?" Before Isabella could answer, a loud crash echoed from downstairs. Glass shattered. Victor immediately cursed under his breath and rushed toward the hallway. Elena followed instinctively, her heart racing as they hurried downstairs together. The main entrance door stood wide open. Rain poured violently into the mansion, while cold winds swept across the marble floor. One of the large front windows had been broken from the outside, and lying near the doorway was Mrs. Harper. The elderly housekeeper was conscious, but shaken badly. Elena rushed toward her, while Victor searched the darkness outside with the flashlight. "He was here," Mrs. Harper whispered fearfully. "I saw him this time." Victor turned sharply. "Did you see his face?" Mrs. Harper slowly nodded. The color drained from Victor's face completely. "Elijah." Elena looked between them in confusion. "Who is Elijah?" Neither of them answered immediately. Finally, Mrs. Harper spoke with trembling lips. "Victor's former business partner." Victor lowered the flashlight slowly. He was also the last person who saw Isabella before she disappeared. A heavy silence filled the mansion. Elena suddenly realized something horrifying. "You think he came back tonight?" Victor looked toward the broken window. "I know he did." Before Elena could process the situation, Daniel suddenly appeared at the staircase in tears. "Uncle Victor," he cried out, "there's someone upstairs." Victor rushed forward instantly. They all ran toward the second floor together. But the moment they reached the west hallway, Elena felt her stomach drop. The door to Isabella's room stood fully open. The wheelchair was empty. Isabella was gone. Victor froze for one brief second before storming inside the room. Papers covered the floor now. Drawers had been ripped open. One of the windows swung violently in the wind. Then Elena noticed something resting on the center table. A single photograph. Victor grabbed it immediately. It was an old picture of Victor, Isabella, and another man standing beside them with his arm around Victor's shoulder. The man smiling at the camera had dark eyes and a calm expression. On the back of the photo, Fresh ink had been written recently. She finally remembers the truth. Elena watched Victor's hands begin shaking. "What truth?" she asked carefully. Victor looked like he could barely breathe. Years of fear, guilt, and anger suddenly appeared on his face at once. "Elijah believes Isabella saw something she was never supposed to see," he said quietly. "What kind of thing?" Victor hesitated. Then slowly, he looked directly at Elena for the first time, without hiding anything behind his expression. "The night my sister disappeared, someone died inside this mansion." Elena felt the room spin around her. Before she could even ask who died, another sound echoed from downstairs. The mansion phone was ringing. Once, twice, 3 times. Victor stared toward the hallway like he already knew who was calling. Then the phone suddenly stopped ringing. A few seconds later, Elena's own phone vibrated inside her pocket. Confused, she slowly pulled it out. The screen showed an unknown number, and beneath it was a message that made her blood run cold. "You should never have followed Victor Blackwood upstairs." Elena's hands trembled as she stared at the message on her phone. The rain outside crashed against the windows while the red emergency lights continued flickering across the hallway walls. Victor stepped closer. "What is it?" Without speaking, Elena handed him the phone. The moment he read the message, his expression hardened instantly. "He's inside the mansion," Victor whispered. Before anyone could react, a loud sound echoed from downstairs again. This time it was a piano in the grand hall. One single note played slowly in the darkness. Then another. Victor rushed toward the staircase, while Elena followed close behind. Mrs. Harper stayed with Daniel upstairs, locking the doors behind them. The grand hall below looked almost completely dark, except for lightning flashing through the tall windows. The piano sat near the fireplace, and someone was standing beside it. A man in a black coat. Elijah. He looked old in the photograph, but his calm smile remained exactly the same. Rainwater dripped from his coat onto the marble floor as he slowly turned toward Victor. "You spent years hiding ghosts in this house," Elijah said quietly. "But secrets always return." Victor's fists clenched. "Where's Isabella?" Elijah smiled faintly. "Safe. At least safer than she ever was with you." Elena looked between the two men, realizing the hatred between them went far deeper than business. Victor stepped forward angrily. "You destroyed my family." "No," Elijah replied coldly. "Your father did." The room fell silent. Elena noticed Victor freeze completely. Years of buried pain suddenly surfaced in his eyes. Elijah slowly pulled an old envelope from his coat and tossed it onto the piano. "Tell her the truth, Victor. Tell your loyal maid why Isabella disappeared." Victor stared at the envelope but didn't touch it. Finally, Elijah spoke again. "The night Isabella vanished, she discovered proof that your father was stealing money from innocent families through the company. When she threatened to expose everything, your father panicked." Elena's chest tightened. Victor lowered his head slowly. "Stop." But Elijah continued. "There was an argument inside this mansion. Your father pushed one of the employees during the fight. His voice became quieter. The man fell down the staircase and died." Elena covered her mouth in shock. Victor's voice shook for the first time. "I tried to protect Isabella after that." "You locked her away," Elijah snapped. "You hid her from the world because you were terrified the truth would destroy the Blackwood name." Victor looked completely broken now. "She was traumatized," he whispered painfully. "After that night, she became afraid of everyone. The press searched everywhere for her. Reporters camped outside the mansion for months. I thought hiding her was the only way to keep her safe." At that moment, footsteps echoed from the hallway behind them. Everyone turned. Isabella stood there weakly, holding onto the wall for support. Tears filled her eyes as she looked at Victor. "You were trying to protect me," she said softly, "but you also imprisoned me." Victor looked like he could barely breathe. "Bella." For several painful seconds, neither of them moved. Then Isabella slowly walked toward her brother. "You should have trusted me years ago." Victor's eyes filled with tears for the first time. "I was afraid of losing you, too." The tension inside the mansion finally broke as Isabella embraced him quietly. Elena watched in silence, realizing the cold and cruel man. she feared was actually someone destroyed by guilt for years. But before anyone could speak again, Elijah suddenly laughed softly. "You still don't understand," he said. Everyone turned toward him. Elijah's calm expression disappeared completely. "The man who died that night," he whispered, "was my brother." The room went silent again. Elena felt chills run down her spine. Elijah looked directly at Victor. "I came back for the truth, but I also came back for revenge." Suddenly, he pulled a small lighter from his pocket and dropped it toward the curtains beside the fireplace. Flames exploded upward instantly. Mrs. Harper screamed from upstairs as smoke began filling the mansion. Daniel cried out in fear while the fire spread across the old curtains and wooden walls. "Elijah!" Victor shouted. But Elijah backed toward the open front door, rain and lightning flashing behind him. "This house was built on lies," he said coldly. "Let it burn with them." Then he disappeared into the storm. Within seconds, chaos filled Blackwood Mansion. Smoke spread through the halls while servants rushed downstairs in panic. Victor immediately grabbed Daniel and helped Mrs. Harper toward the exit while Elena stayed beside Isabella. But as they reached the front doors, Isabella suddenly stopped walking. Her eyes widened in terror. She was staring directly at Elena. "Elena," she whispered shakily, "your necklace." Confused, Elena touched the small silver necklace she had worn since childhood. Isabella's face turned completely pale. That necklace belonged to the employee who died that night. Elena stood frozen near the burning entrance of Blackwood Mansion, while smoke curled across the ceiling above them. Isabella's trembling words echoed inside her mind again and again. That necklace belonged to the employee who died that night. Slowly, Elena removed the silver necklace from around her neck. Her hands shook as she stared at the small pendant she had worn since childhood. "My mother gave this to me before she died," she whispered. "She said it belonged to my father." Victor's expression changed instantly. For the first time, Elena saw pure shock on his face. Outside, rain poured heavily while the servants rushed away from the growing fire. Sirens had already been heard somewhere in the distance, but none of them moved. Isabella stepped closer carefully. Tears filled her eyes as she looked at the necklace. "I remember him," she said softly. "He worked for our company. He was kind to everyone." Elena's breathing became uneven. "What was his name?" Victor looked down at the floor, unable to meet her eyes. "Samuel Reed." The world around Elena suddenly felt silent. That was her father's name. The same father she had spent her entire life believing died in a workplace accident. Mrs. Harper covered her mouth in disbelief, while Daniel looked between them in confusion. Victor finally forced himself to speak. "Your father tried to expose the corruption happening inside Blackwood Industries," he admitted quietly. "He discovered that my father was stealing money through fake contracts and threatening employees into silence." Elena felt tears building in her eyes. "The night he died," Victor continued painfully, "he came here demanding the truth. My father lost control during the argument." Samuel fell down the staircase. His voice broke slightly. "I was only 20 at the time. Isabella saw everything." Elena could barely breathe listening to him. "For years, I wanted to tell the truth," Victor said. "But my father convinced me that if the scandal became public, everything would collapse. I was weak. I protected the family name instead of doing what was right." The mansion behind them groaned loudly as flames spread to the upper floor windows. Elena looked at the burning house that had carried secrets, fear, and pain for years. Then she looked back at Victor. "You treated me badly from the moment I arrived," she whispered. "Did you know who I was?" Victor nodded slowly. "I recognized your father's necklace immediately." Elena's eyes filled with hurt. "Then why hire me at all?" Victor swallowed hard before answering. "Because guilt never leaves people alone." The words hung heavily between them. For a long moment, Elena said nothing. She thought about every cruel moment inside the mansion, every insult, every cold stare. But she also remembered the man wandering the halls at night, carrying years of regret alone. Finally, Isabella reached gently for Elena's hand. "Your father was a good man," she whispered, "and none of this was your fault." At that moment, firefighters finally arrived and began controlling the fire while police officers moved around the property. But strangely, Elena no longer cared about the mansion itself. The real prison had never been the house. It had been the lies. Several weeks later, the story of Blackwood Industries spread across the city. Victor publicly confessed everything connected to his father's corruption and reopened the investigation into Samuel Reed's death. The company paid compensation to families who had suffered because of the scandal, and for the first time in years, the Blackwood name stopped hiding behind silence. Victor also changed. The cold businessman people feared slowly disappeared. He became quieter, humbler, and kinder to the people around him. Some wounds never fully healed, but he finally stopped punishing himself by pushing everyone away. As for Elena, she chose not to stay at the mansion after it was rebuilt. One evening before she left, Victor walked her to the front gates where they first met. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said honestly. Elena looked at him quietly before answering. "Faithfulness doesn't mean accepting pain forever. Sometimes it means choosing peace instead of hatred." Victor lowered his eyes silently. Then Elena gave him a small smile and walked away from Blackwood Mansion with her father's necklace resting over her heart. For the first time in many years, the truth no longer felt hidden in darkness.